Let's explore a couple of different things, beginning with the need for adult love. So, what is adult love? And we begin with the child. What is the child's love? Well, the child has the love of need. The child is completely dependent on the grown-ups or giants around them for survival, for security of survival, for love and belonging, and for validation, the first forms of, or the first four of the hierarchy of human needs outlined by Abraham Maslow. And initially, the child needs validation from the outside. Later, the adult needs self-esteem, which is earned love in response to one's own ideals and values and the principles, such as honesty or doing what one says, integrity, faithfulness, etc., that may be the principles that we use to realize, to create our values. So the child needs this on the outside. The adolescent is also, to one degree or another, you can become an adult before the age of 18. You can stay a child or an adolescent and die a child or adolescent psychologically. But the psychological stage of the adolescent is one of desire and need. Again, from the outside, you can think of the adolescent love as one of lust. And both the child and the adolescent need this from the outside world, from the grown-ups, the adults, the giants that take care of them. And adult love is the type of love that first goes inward and then can be given to another. The child cannot love. The child can need and then seek to please or seek to manipulate in order to get those needs from the outer world. The adolescent can desire, can need, and seek to fulfill their desires from the adult world. But the child and the adolescent cannot love and cannot love themselves, even less than they can love someone else. And so in these early stages of need and desire, the child seeks to form a contract, to learn from the grown-ups around them upon which they depend. What is it I can't say? What is it I need to say? What is it I can't do? What is it I need to do in order for the grown-ups to cooperate and meet my needs? And similarly, you can think of the adolescent form of romantic love as being very much, I want, I need, what do I have to do in order to be attractive, to be desired, to be respected, and get that validation from the outside world. And the process in a healthy growing up cycle is one of meeting those needs enough from the outer world, the survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem, that one can mature, that one can then internalize that. In other words, the giants, the adults, model what it is to take care of oneself. And the adult is initially formed on that template. It's very difficult for a child or an adolescent who has been abused or traumatized to do anything other than abuse and traumatize themselves. because that's the model that's been given to them. And they're not yet at a maturity where they can create their own model. And so being an adult, which for many grown-ups may happen very little, or in some cases never at all, just continuing to seek to manipulate the world and please the world to meet one's needs and desires. But to be a real adult is to love enough to care enough to take time, to take enough time to see enough to understand enough to empathize enough to adjust, to make changes, to attune and adjust enough to succeed at first facilitating one's own hierarchy of human needs to survive, to feel secure in that survival, to have a sense of love and belonging for oneself, and to develop self-esteem, to be clear on what it is we value, and to earn that self-esteem, whereas as a child or adolescent you're earning approval or manipulating to get that approval. For the adult, it's I value this, I have these ideals, and in order to create a world and live my life consistent with those values, I will do these things and I will not do these things, because it's a self-defined value system. Because the child is in a state of sympathy, of just pretty much unconditional acceptance of the language, of the culture, of whatever are the rules and structures and thought processes of the family and cultural system. The adolescent is very much in rebellion against those. I don't like this, I don't want that. And the adolescent is beginning to break orbit away from the family system, away from, in a larger sense of the adult, the cultural system. And having broken orbit and rejected the flaws, the faults, the inequities, the unfairness, the cruelty of the family system and the cultural system, the adolescent has propelled with anger and perhaps hate and a sense of deep rejection. It goes into the antipathy. But what it's rejecting is referenced to the status quo, the family system. It's not yet self-defined. It's saying, I don't like that. But one of the ways you can tell the difference between an adult and an adolescent is you can ask an adolescent, how can I love you deeply and fully? And the adolescent can't answer that yet. It's in rebellion. So it says, well, I don't like that, and I don't like that, and I don't like that, but what do you like? See, that's the stage of the adult. And the adult is the first stage of development that's autonomous, that's self-contained. And so the child and the adolescent still are in a place of need and direct relationship with the system they're in. The adult is is starting to relate to themselves. And the adult is both a synthesis and a synergy. So the adult is not in a polarized rejection of everything. They're not in an unconditional acceptance of everything. They're taking some from each. The adult says, yeah, I don't like lying, hypocritical behavior in parents or in teachers or in the government. But I do like this dish that I had as a child. I liked this dish. I like strawberry ice cream, but I don't like this. And so the adult combines what they like and they don't like, what the child likes and what the adolescent hates and rejects, and forms a unique synthesis a mixture of these things. But the adult goes a step further. It iterates. The adult can take something it doesn't like in the adolescent stage and imagine something that's different, that's better than they experienced as a child. And so this is the social evolution, the consciousness evolution of a culture is individuals first beginning with acceptance, then rejecting, and then creating something completely new that's self-contained. And you're an adult when you can love yourself first, your own child, meet their needs. Your child is still needy. Only now it's your job to meet their need to survive, to feel secure, to have a sense of love and belonging, to have a sense of self-esteem. And the adult works on the higher needs as well, the need to develop one's own talents and gifts. The process of figuring out how to bring those talents and gifts into the larger environment. And finally, and create value and abundance for yourself and other people. And finally, the ultimate adult need is the need to become part of something bigger than the self. Not the family system. It's breaking out of the family system. But then, what do you want to be a part of? Is it a corporation that's partnering with your skills and abilities to create some product or service or idea that's bigger than just you? Is it a new form of religious thought or spirituality that's your own? Is it some hybrid if you've traveled around and visited different cultures and you like some of this culture and some of this culture? What is it that's bigger than you that you want to be a part of? It can be an environmental cause. It can be something you do to be in service of the species. That I'm part of something bigger than myself. And these are the adult needs. So I attune to myself, having taken the time to see and understand and empathize with myself, with my child, with my adolescent. I attune in such a way that I meet my own need to survive. Enough money, enough health care, enough shelter, enough warmth, enough security, some savings, some investments, assets, a car to secure my survival. And then moves towards love and belonging, that I like my inner child. I love my inner child. I understand their needs, and I seek to care for their needs. And I understand my adolescent's curiosity and their desire and what they reject. And I respond as the adult to respect the no, the rebellion of my adolescent, as I create something new that's not just a copy of my parental structure or my cultural structure or my religious structure. It's not just a copy. It's something that I've created, that's me as a separate being. And I love that. And I value that. And I take the time to understand it and see it and attune so that I'm growing. And I define my values. And having defined my values, I work hard to live consistently with those values. And I earn self-esteem in the process. And I discover what I'm good at, what I like doing, what I'm good at doing. That's unique to me, whether it's playing an instrument or drawing or making people laugh or whatever it is that's uniquely me. And I develop and learn to package those gifts so that I can bring value to other people. So it's not just all about me, but I like doing this, and I've found a way, if I like making people laugh, to put together a routine and do some stand-up comedy or entertain my guests, my friends. And having developed that ability and brought it into the world valuably, that in a capitalist framework tends to generate money that increases one's survival and security. And if one's bringing value to other people, it increases the love and belonging that's coming from others, and the respect that's coming from others for being good at something. And then I decide the vision, the organization that I want to be part of that's bigger than myself. And so I'm now an adult. And the crisis in this process, because this is a very healthy and a very optimal process, where when a parent is an adult, they begin, of course, by loving themselves as an adult. Now they're meeting their own needs. They don't need their children to meet their needs. They're meeting their own desires and curiosities and wants, so they don't need their child to fulfill their desires, their interests. Because once you love yourself by meeting your human needs uniquely as an adult, you're then capable of loving another. You're then capable of being a healthy parent, where you are now in service to a child to support them in meeting their need to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, to develop their own self-esteem, to discover their gifts and abilities, to bring them valuably out into the world, and to become part of something bigger than themselves. When you are an adult, you're capable of loving another to support them to be an adult. And it takes time, and it takes skill, and it takes understanding. It's not just words. Now, the problem is that a lot of the grown-ups in our culture are not adults. They're grown-ups. They've got big bodies, but they've never met the need for love and belonging, meaning their parents were not adults. So they are not adults. They're still stuck in the child of I need. But now they have a child, and rather than giving to the child and meeting the child's need for survival, for security, for love and belonging, for validation, for the opportunity to develop their gifts, now the parent is using the child. And you have the phenomena of children raising children. The grown-ups are giants. They're in the parental role, but they don't actually have the psychological ability to be parents. Instead, they look to their child to meet their needs. They look to their child, in the case of incest or manipulation and trauma, to fulfill their desires, to entertain them, to make them look good. They don't have self-esteem of being proud of who they are, so they try and manipulate their children to make them look good, to please others. And a child in a grown-up body who sucks the life force out of their own children and their own adolescents, mentally, emotionally, financially, sexually, does not raise an adult. Because if you've never been loved by an adult, you don't grow up bigger than just I need, and the anxiety of not having that need met. You don't grow older than the adolescent of I desire, I want, and needing someone else to meet those needs. And when a grown-up that is actually a psychological child and adolescent feeds on their children, needs their children to make them feel better, the combination of a child's legitimate state of need and their their childlike parents need to feed on them, creates a devastating psychological framework for the child, where they realize that there is no adult looking out for their human needs. They can't depend on anyone. Instead, they have to go develop a synthetic, pleasing, manipulative personality to get every little thing out. And what the child learns in that relationship is, I have no value. I can't be myself. Myself is not wanted. And I exist to be used. For example, a parent that needs to criticize their child constantly to feel better, because the child inside that grown-up, who is not an adult, feels judged and criticized and insecure. And so it's really a child raising another child by criticizing the child now to try and feel safer, to feel more powerful. All of this gets taken in by the child who does not develop, gets taken in by the adolescent who does not develop. And then you have siblings. You have two children trying to outmaneuver and manipulate each other to get some needs, but a child cannot meet their own needs, and they cannot meet another person's need in any genuine way. They feel empty, they feel self-hatred, they feel worthless, they feel valueless, like so many of the children and adolescent in our culture raised by grown-up children. Now, this creates an incredible emptiness and wound, because not only has the child's need and validation not been met, but while they were vulnerable and weak, they've been leaned on by the grown-ups around them. The teacher shuts up the student that asks smart questions because the teacher needs to look good. And the child's questions, or the student's question, makes their ignorance visible. So the teacher needs to attack the student because they need to look good. It's not about teaching the child. This creates incredible cynicism and bitterness and hostility. So where love might blossom into an adulthood in a healthy framework, you have hurt, valuelessness, self-hate, anger, disgust, cynicism, bitterness, rage, anger, self-loathing, depression. Because when you have children for parents and you complain about how childlike and adolescent they're behaving, the parents hit the child or shame the child or withhold the outer symptoms of affection. You can't go visit your friend. Why? Because you offended me by telling me how annoyed you were that I was late again when I picked you up at school. That because the grown-up has nothing to give. They're just a child in a grown-up body. Well, this makes it very dangerous for the child and adolescent to be authentic, because authentically they're pissed, they're hurt, they're angry, the way any child is when put into the care of grown-up children. And grown-up children are the least tolerant because they're the most narcissistic and the most self-centered. Parents who are psychologically children and adolescents are the least tolerant of any criticism or emotional truth in their parenting. They're not interested. They block it out. They send the child to their room. And so the child and the adolescent learns that it's not even safe to be honest. And it's very difficult to love oneself when you have no model for loving yourself. Your parent doesn't love themselves, and they don't love you. And when you try and object about it, they punish you. you've got no template for what adult love actually looks like. And so the child attacks and hates themselves for not being able to meet their own needs and the needs of their narcissistic parents. And the parent hates them for not being able to make the parent look better, to make it easier for the parent, because the parent is in a childlike and adolescent state. And so nothing but hate is directed towards the inner authentic psyche of the child. And hate doesn't grow an adult. So the child stays stuck in that. If it gets too painful, the empathic regions of the brain shut down. Now, what's left is the reptilian brain, the fight, flight, freeze mechanism of a lizard. You can add in please. Fight, flight, freeze, and please. Out of fear. If I don't do this, my father's going to hit me. If I don't do this, my mother's going to humiliate me. If I don't do this, my brother's going to torment me. Nothing about self-esteem, nothing about love, just immense hostility. But when the parent needs to look good to the neighbors, to the church, then they also not only need to hurt their children, but they need the children to lie about it and say what a great family they are. They need to make the parent look good in public. Because all narcissistic parents, they want love and belonging from the public. And if their child tells the truth about what incompetent parents they are, they won't get it. So there's a love-hate relationship that goes in and bribing the child and punishing the child into pretending that they're actually part of a loving family. And it just communicates to the child again, I'm completely worthless. I have no value other than to lie on my parents' behalf to make them look good at my expense. The type of thing that someone with no value would have to do. And so this is a very deep wound and a very heavy download that is going on constantly in facial expressions, in frowns, in silent treatments, in withdrawals, in threats. I'm never going to love you again. I'm going to leave unless you meet my needs as the grown-up child. Well, this develops the stuck, hostile child who is not loved and cannot love themselves. This child has nothing but hate, fear, anger, disgust, outrage for the status quo, for the culture that allows incompetent parents to raise children incompetently and abusively, for the church that doesn't stick up for the children. You find things like in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt obey and love thy parents. There's no commandment to obey and love the child or to be an adult. The child's the small one that actually does need help. The grown-up, if the culture has done their job, has become an adult capable of being a halfway decent parent. So you now have a stuck child and a stuck adolescent that hates themselves, that hates their parents, that hates the world, and has gotten the message that to communicate that hate, that anger, is unacceptable. The parent falls apart. Well, the child needs an adult to be strong enough to meet their needs of survival and security. If the parent falls apart, bursts into tears, I'm just gonna leave this family, the child realizes the parent is not an adult and can't take the truth. So the child blames themselves for telling the truth. That elicited the childlike state in the parent. So now they blame themselves for that. And once you've filled a child, an adolescent, with hate and cynicism and bitterness, and given them no model for what adult love looks like, and then taught that child that bad things will come from telling the truth, there's a complete isolation inside the wound of the culture. And the child is left to deal with that wound. And the child is incapable of doing so. The child is stuck, frozen in time with unmet needs and a lot of self-hatred and hate from the family system. And the adolescent is stuck in the adolescent phase, filled with hate and self-contempt, and contempt and hate for the world, and unable to meet that need. And the child and the adolescent are furious and enraged at the cult environment that led to this dynamic, where they, as innocent children, come in and have absolutely no way to win, to be someone they can like and admire. So they hate themselves and they hate the world. And then they learn that if they tell the truth about that, everyone will reject them, punish them, shame them, fall apart, and blame them for the feelings that children raising children actually produce in the human heart and in the human biology. Now, even if this only happens some of the time, the abuse, the narcissism, the incest, the bullying, the torment, even if it only happens some of the time, when it happens at high doses for a child and an adolescent that is in a completely dependent state, financially, emotionally, mentally, and physically, on the giants around them, it's called trauma. It's an overwhelming pattern of energy that's too big for a child or adolescent to deal with. And the psyche and the body deals with this big pattern of energy by flipping a switch. It takes the mathematical equation of feelings and sensations in that moment that are produced by that abuse, and it flips a breaker and partitions that charge in a frozen state. And that part of the self no longer develops. Even if another part of the self moves on, figures out how to manipulate the system, figures out how to look good, figures out how to meet the needs of the narcissistic parent to a point where they can at least leave home and be alive and in one piece. The partitioned, traumatized parts are offline. So even if some medicine and learning goes on in what remains of the self, that does not connect. It's kind of like a corrupted hard drive that gets so dangerous to the computer, you unplug the hard drive. But as soon as you unplug the hard drive, the viruses that are on that hard drive, they don't have any power to develop further, but nor do they heal in any way. There's just been a cut in the interaction, so they're frozen in time in these blocked and corrupted areas called dissociated trauma. And if you were 3 years old when the first major trauma hit, there's a part of you that stays feeling 3 years old, helpless and overwhelmed, in a frozen state. It never grows up. If the next trauma happens when you're 3.5, now you've got a 3.5-year-old hard drive that's disconnected. When you try and reconnect those parts of the self that have been traumatized and dissociated, as you make the connection, what comes back is this overwhelming panic of a 3-year-old of a 5-year-old. And if you haven't learned how to be an adult, which you will not have learned if you're surrounded by grown-up children, doesn't matter their roles or ages, you do not know how to do anything other than to punish and blame the parts of yourself that are speaking and mirroring back what was done to them. And so you can just dissociate them again, which re-traumatizes those ages, and nothing happens. Now we have a situation where the ego is afraid of itself. I don't want to think of that memory. I don't want to reconnect with that part. I don't want to think of that. I don't want to see this person. I don't want to look at the color blue because the person who raped me had a blue shirt on. It's too much. And you've got dissociation, fear, and self-alienation in a paradigm of hate, overwhelm, grief, helplessness, and a sense, I can't do this, I can't survive. And it's impossible to function in the present moment with a 3-year-old infant screaming inside of you, I'm going to fall apart, this is too much, I'm not going to survive. You can't go to a business meeting and sign a paper in a competent manner with a screaming 3-year-old inside. But that 3-year-old stays screaming inside until it is reintegrated in a healing and competent environment. By what? By an adult. Now, you haven't learned to be an adult in this framework. So you're hoping that your therapist, your friend, your lover that's triggering or encouraging this reintegration knows how to love the parts of you that no one has ever taught you how to love because no one's modeled love. Usually the parts of you that are traumatized and dissociated are the parts that your parents were frightened of, that your teachers were intimidated by, the parts that have been banished because there was no competent adult in your entire system that could actually advocate and love that part. And so it lies frozen there with large portions of our energy and our potential. They don't grow up. They don't learn how to love. Now, it's difficult to see these things because every parent has an incredibly, particularly a narcissistic child and adolescent parent, has a strong need to see themselves as a great parent, as a terrific teacher, as a wonderful therapist, as a great family. Because the alternative is overwhelming and traumatic for them. To say, as a parent, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I mean, why would you? You haven't received a single hour of parental literacy in your entire life, and your parents were terrible examples, but I don't have a clue what I'm doing as a parent. I'm messing up my kids. I'm betraying their innocence. I'm feeding on them rather than meaningfully supporting them to be themselves. And I demand that they hide all their feelings to make me look better because I'm really a child inside. A narcissistic parent will not tell their child that truth because a narcissist wants to look good. And if they tell the child the truth, they'll look bad to themselves and the child and perhaps other members of the public. They don't want to look bad. They want to look good at the expense of their children. And so Alice Miller wrote a beautiful book called For Your Own Good. And it's all about the sadistic behavior of parents, that the parents in their narcissism and self-absorption reframe as love. I hit you for your own good. I shamed you in public for your own good. I sent you to be traumatized at school for your own good as well. I am this wonderful, loving parent that's doing all these things that hurt you for your own good. And if the child pokes a hole in that balloon and it pops, and the parent is confronted with their inadequacy as parents, they attack the child. They fly into a rage. They fall apart, letting the child know it's not okay. And so the child colludes with the abusive parent to be brainwashed into a re-scripting of what love actually is. Hitting, shaming, coercing, manipulating, guilt-tripping, that's what love is. Because that's what they're doing, and that's what they're labeling as love, and that's what they're hitting me if I don't agree with. So, okay, fine. But in the process, the ultimate narcissism of the parent, the ultimate narcissism of the church, of the teacher, of the government, is you must go insane in order to satisfy my need to look good, even when I'm not doing very well. And parents add to that by blaming every mistake on the child. You know, it's very, very common for parents in abuse cultures not to say, my wife hurt my feelings, because then they would be owning that it is their wife. They're their feelings. That's the person they chose to marry. That's the person they're choosing to be in relationship with. And that's the person they are evoking this behavior with. Because it's unusual to have behavior that has nothing to do with the other person. Usually there's some feeding dynamic. I'll do something to upset you, and then I'll complain that you're upset. So if a responsible parent says, my wife is hurting me, and the reason she's hurting me is because I hurt her and don't know how to stop doing that, and the reason she's my wife is because I don't know how to pick a better partner, the reason she's hurting me is I don't know how to stop hurting her, so we're just siblings throwing pain back and forth, because neither of us know what the fuck we're doing. Well, then again, that reveals the shame, the sense of inadequacy and unlovability that the grown-up child is trying to hide from the world. So it's very common for parents, when complaining about their spouses, to say, your mother did this. And then, you know, my father would look at me as if I had chosen this mother, had chosen to be born, had chosen to ruin his life, had picked the mother that ruined his life, and he was just an angry victim. What was I going to do about the fact that my mother was hurting his feelings? You know, and then mother would come along and your father did this, so let's blame the child. Why? Because they can't fight back. Because they're small and the giants are big. And they can try and fight back, but if they get hit every time they tell the truth, it's easier to lie. But in lying so many times and starting the dishonesty so early, we have grown children we have scared children in grown bodies praising their parents as if they did absolutely everything perfectly, which then gets them the praise or the bribe from the child inside that parent's body that desperately needs to feel good about themselves because they are not an adult, which means they can't change either. So viruses tend to spread and replicate. The virus of a narcissistic, abusive child in a grown-up body is very effectively disseminated to the next generation, who finds themselves feeling small, frightened, resentful, rebellious, unable to take responsibility, to respond effectively to their life, unable to love themselves, their own inner child or adolescent, unable to love others, but still having the same needs that every human has had in human history. I need to be loved. I need to survive. I need to feel secure in that survival. I need validation. So I've got to go out and try and get it. But in a psychologically illiterate cult, what percentage of the population is adult enough to A, be able to meet their own needs and love themselves, and then look around them and say, well, you poor child. You may be 40 years old, but you're a little child in there. You're having a tantrum. You don't know how to meet your own needs. And what's important to understand is, while no child and no adolescent can love as an adult, they can love in terms of need. I need this desperately. They can love in terms of I want this desperately. I desire this desperately. I demand this. But they cannot actually love. Children and adolescents are incapable of adult love. So they still need from the other. And they're still in the abuse contract they signed with their parent. I'll make you look good, and you don't hit me as much. Or why don't you compare me favorably with my brother who speaks out and tells the truth about what he's pissed about? And I'll say, don't listen to brother, Mom. You're wonderful. And Mom will give me the lollipop and take me shopping and glare at my brother and threaten to kick him out of the house. So I'm still signing. I figured out how to survive. I'm a child. I'm surrounded by narcissistic children. And this is my coping strategy to get some of my needs met, because I can't meet them on my own. I'm a child. I just know how to manipulate, how to extort, how to bully. Whatever was the learned behavior at home, I'm alive. That worked as well as it worked. So I'll find someone as a grown-up, not an adult, to do that with. To bully, to intimidate, to manipulate, to do whatever it is that kept me alive. And that's all I know how to do. The child and adolescent hate themselves in this situation because they've internalized and blamed themselves for all the problems in the system, and because they have been shamed, blamed, and abused as the children in parents' bodies. Desperately, you watch little children. When shame-based children, abused children, break a glass, their first thought is, let's not clean up the mess, let's earn some money, let's buy a new glass, let's apologize to Mom, let's do something nice to make it up. That would be a model of responsible behavior, but you only learn that from adults. In abusive families, the child drops a glass, and they realize that their parents are in scarcity. Children and adolescents don't usually create that much abundance. Their parents are frightened, the parents are insecure, and the parents are going to take out their feelings on someone in on one of the children or all of them. So what the child desperately tries to do is make sure I didn't do it. That's the symptom of a child in a sociopathic environment. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. It was him. It was him. No, it was him. That's how siblings behave in an abuse cult. Well, you just take that same psychology and you put it in a parent's body. You see, and mom knocks over a cup. And she feels 5 years old and like she's going to be punished. She feels bad and undeserving, the way her parents made her feel when she broke things. She doesn't want to feel that way. And she's got power now because she's a parent. So you have blaming, shaming parents that are really children and adolescent in grown-up bodies that will literally turn to one of their children. And they will invent a rationale to say, you did it. I don't deserve to be punished or told that anything or talked back to. No, no, no. It's your fault. Now, the lengths to which a child in a grown-up body in the parental role goes to convince themselves and to ram it down their child's throat that it's really the child's fault that the mother drove into a tree. You know, this is just very, very normal dysfunctional behavior. The parent drives into the tree. They collapse because they're not adults. Oh, what's it? Oh, this is going to do this, and we're not going to be able to pay the bills. And then they look angrily into the back seat. You see what happens when you're talking with me when I'm driving? You see what happens when you're fighting? I'm a child. Don't expect me to teach my siblings or my children good behavior. Don't expect me to be able to juggle all of these things. No one taught me to. You see, these are intergenerational abuse dynamics. And back to the glass. You see, who put that glass there? I may have knocked it over, but someone put it there, and that's the person I'm going to hit or send to their room to transfer my expectation of being punished onto the small one who can't defend themselves. That's why you want to be a leader. That's why you want to be president of the United States. The only one that can't be taken to trial. I didn't do it. I didn't lose. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything wrong. It's their fault. Now, some adult children or grown-up children are then punished for not being responsible. And so they'll take responsibility, but because they've been shamed as children for not being more grown up, but then they'll sulk and take covert punishment and revenge because there's no way to just acknowledge, forgive, grow, and change, because that takes an adult. It takes an adult to recognize this happened, acknowledge, here's my role in it, forgive myself, we all make mistakes, and change. And we're no longer going to buy glasses, given we've got a lot of children in this house. I'll buy plastic cups. No harm, I've got it figured, I'm an adult. But it takes an adult to recognize, acknowledge, forgive ourselves, and change. And to model that to children so that they learn the pattern of recognize, acknowledge, forgive, and change. That's when you see the rare case of a child saying, I'm sorry, I broke this. I'll pay for it out of my pocket money. My brother wasn't involved. And mom says, thanks for telling me. Let's mop this up. And, let me participate in some way to see that this is less likely to happen again. And we're in this together. We share responsibility, the ability and willingness to respond as an adult. We're not in the blame-punishment dynamic, where it's all about let's blame the scapegoat in the family. There's usually someone who's particularly vulnerable who has all of the family shadow dumped on. And who gets that's what makes their family happiest if they don't talk back and just admit. That's where the martyrhood dynamic comes on. I am misunderstood, unappreciated, it was unfair, all this stuff was put on me, and I couldn't say anything because if I talked back, then that's a new crime. Don't talk back. Don't talk back. So you're either going to accept the scapegoat position that's been dumped on you, or you will be punished for trying to get out of the position, because we all want a scapegoat, so none of us have to deal with our own inadequacies, because we're children. And we're just being adolescent and children in a world that needs adults. Now, it's very difficult to discover what it's like to be an adult when you were raised and surrounded by grown children. Most don't. That's why we have a world filled with grown children. And it's usually the most vulnerable, lowest ranking person that is made into the fall guy, into the scapegoat. You know, even in companies, you would think that a real adult would take responsibility for the systems and for hiring and all that, and apologize publicly and take the initiative to respond when something goes wrong in the company. But in sociopathic children who are promoted into leadership roles, they may be the prime person who made the mistake. But because they're the boss or the power figure, they will shift the blame to someone else and they will get fired. You know, when Stormy Daniels comes forth and talks about the infidelity and hypocrisy, etc., with her relationship with Donald Trump, it's her that gets the high legal bill and is made the fall guy. Why? Well, Trump is higher rank. Similarly with Joe Biden, when Tara Reade doesn't respond well to being molested by a younger Joe Biden, she gets talked to by the boss for making a problem, for jeopardizing the career. Just like if a child is starting to behave in a delinquent way, to act out the shadow dynamics of the family system, the parents often say, there's nothing to do with me, let's punish the child. I won't take responsibility for not having a strong relationship with my child, for not having an empathic relationship rather than a sociopathic relationship, for not acknowledging my faults so that all this anger builds up inside. I won't take any responsibility for that. We'll just blame the child and try to look mature and big. When you're surrounded by children, the default is to be and stay stuck as a child, a very angry, a very hurt child that can't speak out because as soon as they do, they're punished. See, children are actually victims. And 3-year-olds who are traumatized and trapped in grown-up bodies are victims too. Because theoretically, you look at that person and you say, well, you didn't have to do that. A mature adult could have looked at this and made this other choice. But they're not a mature adult. The part of them that acted out is 3 years old. That 3-year-old has never been around a mature adult. It hasn't gotten reintegrated in a trauma-illiterate cult. They haven't learned to love that child. They've learned to be ashamed of it, so it doesn't develop. And certain things trigger and re-traumatize that 3-year-old who behaves exactly as a 3-year-old. Now here's the thing to understand about the child and the adolescent, inside and out. They need an adult, and they need love, and they desire love and respect. They cannot compel it or teach their parents how to do it as an adult would, because they're not adults. What they can do is pout, self-mutilate, have rages, destroy their own body, destroy their own things, get addicted, take passive-aggressive action towards someone who won't hurt them. So if their parents are regularly dumping shame and rage on them, and every time they try and communicate those feelings, they are reprimanded, grounded, humiliated further, it's not a safe place to express the aggression that is being produced predictably and statistically by the parents, by the teachers, etc. So then, what, you can go out and join a gang and smash someone else's car, where as long as you don't get caught. But then the cult teaches you that you're a bad person for having those feelings, those impulses, for not being trained, which you're not, to do something useful, or to teach the parent or authority figure to stop being so hypocritical, so narcissistic, so abusive. You know, when you have incredibly narcissistic leaders, they take all the praise for anything that happens, and they give all the blame to their team. Unless you have the good fortune of being an adult already, you just go deeper into the resentment and rage of the undeveloped child and adolescent. The child and adolescent has nothing in their disposal other than hate, manipulation, rage, manipulation, sabotage, and they do not want to succeed. They're not interested in a corner office, whatever. The child wants love. The child wants survival and security by a parent. Now when that's very clearly not going to get met, you can get a very cynical adolescent who becomes sociopathic with a very clear underhanded agenda of revenge, but above ground playing the role, looking good, pretending to care, but secretly undermining everything, etc., to get ahead in a reptilian environment, because they've never met an adult that would look them in the eye and hear all that rage and disgust and say, you're absolutely right. This has nothing to do with you. You've got sociopathic teachers, you've got sociopathic parents, you've got sociopathic government. And you think, well, it's not all that way. Of course not. But it's enough. And one of the things that adolescents do is they create black and white pictures. So if there's enough hypocrisy, enough cruelty, enough abuse, enough lies, the adolescent brain is not a sophisticated brain that says, you know, my parents are 33% empathic, except when they get near their trauma, then they're complete reptiles. It's too complicated for an adolescent or a child. So the adolescent develops a black and white picture. They're evil, they're bad. if there's enough there that's hurtful to them, and they don't know how to respond to it, because in a dysfunctional environment, when you whistleblow, like if you're Julian Assange or Edward Snowden and you point out that your government is breaking the law, committing war crimes, becoming the very weapon of mass destruction it's going to war to blame on Iraq, killing 1 million innocent Iraqis. When you say you are the weapon of mass destruction that you say you're going there to find, the government doesn't want to deal with its inadequacy, with its cruelty, with its lies, with why did you spend $8 trillion to murder 1 million innocent people for weapons that weren't there? To create more terrorists than existed before you began a war on a feeling, just revealing how inadequate you are? Meaning, you cannot create a war on terror. And if your war on people who are terrified has the effect of terrifying them even more, humiliating and abusing even more of them, such that there are more terrified, angry people at the end of your campaign, you have revealed a sociopathic, pathological level of not only psychological illiteracy, but profound cruelty and incompetence. You are the weapon of mass destruction. But a shame-based parent, be that a government, community liver, they can't deal with that. And so they beat the shit out of Edward Snowden or Julian Assange. Why? For pointing out the truth. And it is questionable whether the truth helps that much when you're a child and adolescent, if you're shame-based. Because the United States military doesn't recognize its self-destructiveness in areas, doesn't acknowledge its role in that, doesn't apologize and forgive itself and then change and then create more allies. It attacks the whistleblower, righteously goes back and focuses on the area that it's doing a good job. It's never black and white. And continues with its method. Because it can't change, because it's not an adult. You don't get to have adult organizations or governments made up of regressed, psychologically illiterate children. And you don't get to have competent parents out of that either. Now, there is a tremendous amount of grief at the loss of humanity that comes from sending so many people down into their reptilian brain where there is no humanity. It's a reptilian brain. Reptiles do not have humanity. If you traumatize people enough, their humanity shuts down, and what's left is a fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, or fight, flight, freeze, and please, strategy for getting one's needs met in a perceived frightening environment that is perceived as frightening because it is traumatic and sociopathic, narcissistic, and asks the small one to take the hit so that the large one looks better. How do you, as the individual, how do we be marginally adult around all of this? The first thing is to acknowledge that it's incredibly counterintuitive. When every time you've gone to look at the truth, it's threatened someone who was a regressed child in a grown-up body and an authority figure. When you understand that, And I understand that some of us have never met an adult, and certainly weren't raised by two of them. How do we recognize that, acknowledge that we have some ability in our freedom to interact in the space between stimulus and response, to forgive ourselves for being stuck and finding ourselves in this position? And we have to forgive ourselves first, because you cannot forgive another, just like you cannot love another before you've loved the self. You cannot forgive another before you've forgiven yourself. The child cannot forgive themselves. The adolescent cannot forgive themselves. They can only blame and hold out that if I have enough tantrum and hurt myself enough and don't do anything and refuse to cooperate, then maybe a competent adult will show up and love me. But when you're surrounded by reptiles, that tantrum is met by contempt, by people who are not adults either. It's met with superiority, it's met with punishment, it's met with judgment. It's not met with responsibility. The adult is the only one capable of loving. An adult could show up and talk with the grown-up child and see where they're stuck and help them get some glimmering of how to meet their needs constructively without just destroying their own body or their own careers or their own dreams. The child doesn't know how to do that. How do we respond? Well, it's important to have compassion for how hard this is. If it were easy, our parents would have done it. It's not fun being sociopathic, shame-based, incompetent parents. It may be more fun to bully your children than to feel completely helpless oneself, but it's not as fun to be a child as it is to be an adult. You're dependent. You don't have autonomy. You're incapable of loving yourself, let alone another human being. It's not very fun, particularly when you're surrounded by other people who are incapable of loving in many cases. So if we recognize that that's the case, we acknowledge we have some influence, we forgive ourselves for existing in a psychologically illiterate culture, for not being able to create better parents. Of course, the child will blame the parent at that point. But the adult is about owning that now it's my turn to guide my life. And so the adult can actually forgive themselves for being stuck in a childlike state with tremendous odds against them. And just how painful that is, and can forgive themselves for their own incompetency that admittedly stems directly from being taught incompetently. But when we realize how hard it is to forgive and love ourselves, we can also have some empathy and understanding that if we haven't figured out how to love ourselves, why would our parents, with even less opportunity than we have in many cases, why would they have figured out how to love themselves? They didn't. They found it just as hard, and they're probably not going to. Or certainly not to live up to the child and adolescence ideals, to heal all the hypocrisy and this and that, the other. They're probably not going to. So the adult is partly about owning one's ability and willingness to respond. But if you're psychologically illiterate, and all your reflexes are to hurt yourself and others the way you were taught, respond how? How does an adult respond? One of the reasons I'm making this recording is no one explained this to me growing up, but I got glimmers of it. I read Robert Bly and Iron John, got a little taste of that as a child. More recently, I read Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, some good frameworks there. Looking at Western history and colonies and slavery and torment and torture and hypocrisy and being burned at the stake if you're interested in herbology, you can see that there's some progression, some of it going in a generally good direction. But what can we do? How do we respond? Well, if we recognize that we're ignorant because we were raised by ignorant people, and we're scared because we were raised by scared people, we're traumatized because we're raised by traumatized people, and that we are psychologically illiterate, we can respond and be willing to respond by studying some of the literature. Most of us have not received a single hour of competent, science-based emotional literacy. So we could study feelings and how they work in the psyche and in the body and in the mind, and the thoughts that create the feelings, the beliefs that create the thoughts, and the experiences that create the beliefs. And where can we interrupt those cycles to pivot a bit? To have the head-on collision at lower speed, if we don't know how to stop it. Have it at lower speed, to slow certain things down. To ram into another psyche a little bit less unregulated, a little bit less intensely. We can become literate. We can study trauma. We can study attachment disorder. We can start learning. How much? How much is your adult there? Can you create an hour a day? An hour a week? An hour a month? It gets to be a little bit dishonest if you pretend you don't even have an hour a month, but if you study 12 hours of trauma literacy for 10 years, you'll have 100 hours more than most people. You spend an hour or half an hour a week, you'll have way more than most people. And who do you turn to if you don't know what you're doing? Well, science teaches us to look at data, to look at what's producing good results. And Bessel van der Kolk has done a good job of outlining both the infancy of our current technologies around trauma and regression and things of that nature, but also some things that have some hope to them, that work a certain percentage of the time for a certain number of people. And if you realize you didn't create the whole cult, it's not your fault that your parents didn't know what they're doing, but here you are. What can you do that you're willing to do to respond to this pattern, this dis-ease? One of the things is email therapy. If you've got an angry and disgruntled and frightened adolescent or child inside of you, let them write you an email. Or write an email to them. Dear Dane at 5 years old, I just read this book. That wasn't your fault. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you didn't have a single competent adult. In my current life, I have 5 people that are sometimes an adult. This person can do a little bit here. This person can do a little bit there. They're not an adult either, but sometimes they are. In this setting, in this area, they generally behave responsibly, lovingly, meaning they are able and willing to respond in a way that facilitates sustainable well-being. They're willing to look at the truth in this area. So you can write an email and do an email diary back and forth. Sometimes, if you put a camera facing you so that you can look into your own eyes, press record, you can get in touch with a part of yourself that's hurt, angry, shame-based, terrified, overwhelmed, and let them talk. Talk to the camera, because cameras are superior to emotionally illiterate human beings, because they don't interrupt you. They don't have the agenda to make you crazy so they look good. They listen. The camera will listen. And it can be the first time that your 5-year-old has ever had anyone interested in what they had to say without interruptions. Just listen until they're done. Leave an hour open. If they have 10 minutes of stuff to say, let them say it. Now, if you look at your inner child and your inner adolescent with contempt, with "you're so dumb doing this," you're not an adult. So you're a child listening to your child. It's not going to change the loop. But if you have some glimmer of understanding, of empathy, of compassion for what it was like to be 5 years old, with less money than you have now, less resources than you have now, less knowledge, and a tiny body, if you have some glimmer of empathy in there, it could do them some good to have one person actually listen to what they have to say without interrupting them, without shaming them, without blaming them and saying, well, it was your mother's fault. Email, diary, video, but it's about dialogue. And what a child and adolescent need, what you need in your traumatized, regressed child and adolescent state, you need an adult to apologize, to own it. It's not your fault. So when they're done telling you all of your problems, don't get out your spiritual critic and complain that a child whines. That's what abused children will always do. Instead, ask, how is it that even at your age, you haven't learned how to take care of a child? And then realize you're probably doing a better job than your parents, and then realize what that child had to put up with. If it's hard for you to even look at that child, imagine what it's like to be that child. Give them some love, some forgiveness, some empathy. Apologize to them. I am so sorry that you've waited all this time to say this stuff, and even now, the best I can do is hear you and be scared. And that's not good enough to be an adult for you. It's the best I can do because I haven't had any models. It's not your fault. And don't take it personally that I don't know how to love you. It's not your fault. It's our responsibility. We as a cult could allocate an hour a week of emotional literacy. We could spend an hour every week in high school talking about the problems of hitting and physical and mental and sexual abuse in school, and forming support groups to actually challenge certain abusive parents when teenagers actually need help. Reptilian, narcissistic, abusive parents will sue the shit out of those schools if they can get away with it, because they don't know how to deal with their shame. Because they were treated the same way. They don't know how to change, and if everyone knows they're incompetent, their inner child expects to be punished, not helped. And in many cases, the cult is so reptilian that when you reveal someone's flaws for everyone to see, that's exactly what a reptilian cult does. Punish the person who by definition doesn't know how to do it better. It's not fun to abuse people. It's just more fun than being abused or being shamed. But it's way more fun to love, and everyone wants to have fun. but not everyone knows how. If you've been hurt your whole life, you don't learn how to love. You don't learn that it's fun to love. You never had it. Email therapy, video therapy, EMDR, rapid eye movement. It's a specific therapeutic protocol. You can look it up. Some people, it's a game changer. If it's not, we are not a psychologically or traumatically literate cult. So if you're expecting me or anyone else raised in a psychologically illiterate cult to actually know how to do this perfectly, that just confirms how psychologically illiterate we are. Because if you think a psychologically illiterate cult raises highly psychologically literate people who actually know what they're doing, your ignorance stems from the fact that you know nothing about the psychology that every human has a right to know if they want a decent life. It's a human right to understand how the human heart works, how the psyche works. Psyche is just Greek for self. Is that too much to ask, to actually know how we work? Do we really need to know how to play an iPad game more than we need to know how our own feelings work? It's insane. But insanity is rampant in a sociopathic, psychologically illiterate cult that, wouldn't you know, raises ignorant, psychopathic, psychologically illiterate people, whether those are teachers, governments, or anyone else. EMDR is something that works for some people. If it works, by all means, be adult enough to do some more of it. Family constellation therapy. It's too much to hold all these feelings of a whole family system in one body and not be clear what feelings are mine, what feelings are my mom's, what was I asked to carry to be the scapegoat. It's too complicated. To unravel that, having actors play out these dramas together in a system of therapy that has helped many people, again, it's a possibility. Email therapy, video therapy, EMDR, family constellation therapy. Each of these have helped me in some way, and every single one of them has been imperfect. I've never found the perfect therapist. Some of them are so dangerous, they make it worse. But what is the alternative? Since we don't know what we're doing, the scientific method is try things, measure the cost, measure the benefit, and if the benefit is greater than the cost, do it until you find something better. And there's always something better, but we have invested as a society less than 1% of our resources into studying the human psyche and educating our people about it. So we're 99% psychologically illiterate. This is a step to become a little bit more literate. Then you have listening. Go into meditation, just pay attention to your body. Notice what your child wants. Let your adult give it. You want a popsicle and you're the parent. Are you too fat? Will your well-being be enhanced if you give the child a popsicle? Or do you need to parent and negotiate with that child and say, okay, you can have a popsicle, but first we need to go for a run. Because my job, it's not your job, child. You want as much popsicle as you want. That's fine. Good for you. But my job is to do that in a way that doesn't damage your survival, your security, because you're now in me. This is my body. I've got to take care of it. Well, that's an adult. If you're hijacked by your child, I wanted this, there's no adult there. So you behave like a child, and children don't know how to love themselves. Giving the child what it wants, giving the adolescent respect, listening to the adolescent. What do you have to say? I get it. That is unfair. It is overwhelming. I do talk to you rottenly regularly. I make you feel worthless. I'm sorry. I learned from my parents who make me feel worthless. Now I'm doing it to you. I'm sorry. I didn't stick up for you there because I'm afraid of my boss. I'm sorry about that too. Take responsibility. That's what adults do. Forgive yourself for not being perfect, for not being knowledgeable, for not sticking with it. Apologize to the child and adolescent even more. If it's hard for you, it's harder for them. They're the small ones. Ask them for tips. How can I love you better? What do you want to be heard? What would you like? Do you want to express your anger in a painting, in a poem? Tell me. I'll give it a shot. I'm scared of doing it wrong because I'm shame-based. I'm afraid I can't write a poem. That's my responsibility. I'm sorry. Take it off of the child. Witnessing in various ways. And then just the discipline. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm overwhelmed. I'm terrified. Okay. Is your survival taken care of? You got enough rent, or you're paying down credit card debts? Is your survival taken care of? If not, what can you do to be an adult for that child? Because you're responsible for them. Now, if you are a child and you are an adolescent, you will hate this because you've been asked to take responsibility for your fucked up parents and your fucked up teachers and stuff your entire life. And now you, the child, has to be responsible for you again. When is someone going to take care of me? Well, it's not your fault, but it is the reality that you had to take care of your parents as a child, and you had to please them and do this and shut up about that as an adolescent, and study inane subjects in schools from teachers that didn't care just so you could get a GED and not be shamed further. None of that's fair. Hear all of that. But now I've got a choice. I can kill myself. I can drown myself in alcohol. I can go out and vandalize things. Or I can meet my own needs. Because I did deserve someone to take care of me when I was young, and I'm now 30, I'm now 40, I'm now 50. No one's going to do it. It's not fair, it's horrible. What? Is there an adult willing to do it? And at least a little mind twist, you can say, wow, if I'm not willing to take care of myself at age 40, imagine how, and I resent that. I've got to take care of myself. I'm furious. No one's ever taken care of me. I don't know what I'm doing. No one taught me. I hate the world. So that's what was given to you. That's the cult virus. Now imagine if you have a child on top of that. That's what your parents had. All their fears, all their ignorance, all their punishment, all their trauma, all their psychological illiteracy, plus, in addition to no one meeting their needs, the cult said they're horrible people if they didn't take care of you and and you didn't. So you can at least understand why they hated, why their inner child and their inner adolescent was so narcissistic and is so narcissistic to this day, and doesn't want to hear what you have to say and doesn't want to learn where they were bad parents and all the. Narcissists don't want to learn that stuff. Well, if you don't want to learn it for you, then your logic can at least understand that your parents wouldn't want to learn it even more now that you're 30, 40 years old. And they were told in their cult that they just do what their parents did, and then they'd be free and at least could stop feeling so guilty by age 18 if they kept you alive, and now it's up to you and I don't want to hear anything. Well, the inner child isn't happy with that. The inner adolescent isn't happy about that. You fucking parents, you never heard a goddamn thing. You never owned a thing. You never apologized. You never admitted that you drove my sister to commit suicide, or that, and then I had to hide that and this, and when I was grieving. You never taught me how to grieve. You've never admitted a goddamn thing. You've never been an adult. So I'm not going to be an adult either. But that goes on in infinity, with no one being willing to be an adult. And if you're not willing to be an adult and you're entitled and this and that and the other, you may not wear a condom. You may give birth to another innocent being and pass on all of the cruelty and stupidity and rage and hate that was done to you, and then blame them for it. I wasn't planning on that. I just... The child is a victim. The adolescent is a martyr. Rightfully so. But if you don't grow into an adult, if you identify, if all you've learned from grown children and grown adolescents is to be a grown child and adolescent, or a bully or an abuser, or to hate and punish the world, if that's all you've learned, that's what you will be, and that meme will go forward. The adult is the only one capable of interrupting that pattern. And it takes baby steps, and then more, and then more, and then more, working with these materials. Like you're being an adult to watch this video. I'm being more of an adult to make this video. I'm paying attention to what I'm saying. I'm hoping I'll learn something I didn't know before. Because no one's taking care of my inner child or my adolescent. They're still pissed about that. When I am a child and adolescent, I don't want to take care of your child and adolescent because I haven't figured out how to take care of my own. And that's the kind of framework that we're in. You probably, if you're not an adult, don't want to take care of my child and adolescent and mentor me into learning to be an adult. And so we're a psychologically illiterate, highly abusive cult, learning a few things with the luxury of technology. And our species is, more psychologically literate in this generation than the last, and the last before that. But it's not going to be perfect in this generation. But if you are willing to respond, if you're willing to put aside 3 hours a week, you can make some pretty good headway. And a year from now, you'll have 300 or 400 hours of knowledge and experience and stuff that you didn't have before. So good luck. And thanks for caring enough about you, about me, about our species to sit with these issues.